Right, so I've got less than the time it takes to boil an egg to tell you about the blue-collar side of tertiary education and schools and preschools and what they got out of it. So I'm going to be really quick talking about the state of play. I'm going to take off my economics hat because it's physically impossible to do that in that time, and I'm going to put on my Australian public policy maker hat. And I'm going to tell you about these things in really brief words, probably one or two, and a couple of pictures. So last year, everything was on hold. We had the planes landing of the university's accord, the early childhood care sector workers were being reviewed, and also schools and their funding were being reviewed. And so everything was, as the Productivity Commissioner said at the time, neutral. It's a bit really neutral budget. And that was because we already had inflation then, it was higher than now, and we were walking on that knife edge of inflation in making the policy. Moving to this year. So what's happened? Well, we're still on the knife edge of policy. And now what happens? So there were a couple of measures in here, but largely in the sector, there's not much money. Not much of it's going to the sector per se. So their vet student loans, well, they'll also get those HECS indexation changes, but everyone agrees that it probably won't make much difference to anybody. But the good thing about HECS is that it's to people who are in Commonwealth supported places. So there's other room for them to manoeuvre with it. The teaching practicum, already mentioned, well, it's means tested and it doesn't start yet, not until July 2025. That's the policy knife edge, pushing it into the future when apparently we've solved inflation. And the other one, the construction apprenticeships, was actually 20,000, but 5,000 of those are pre-apprenticeships. It turns out they're only over 2 years. And from 2025, pushing it into the future again when the inflation is already solved. So where does that take us? So, putting back on my economics hat, unfortunately, the large part of what we're doing in this for education, and certainly for the blue-collar area, is trying to solve problems that are long-term. About 40 years we've been putting woolly policy into the black box of economics, and the picture that you get is that it looks like something the cat dragged in with a wool, and it's the boundaries and sector connections of vet and higher education. They are confused, contested and collaborative. I didn't say it. Back in 2017, Craig Fowler, who led the National Centre for Vocational Education and Training, said that it's confused, contested and collaborative. And the other thing is that where are we headed? Well, I've got you a picture. We're headed down a slope in education, and we have been for some time. Everyone's been talking about the results falling for school kids, PISA falling, the low completion rates for our students. Well, this picture here is about the gross value added. Saul Leslie lent it to me. And it shows you by industry that in the whole picking of winners, things that they're doing about industries, whatever, that education is down. It's only 2/3 of the much maligned public sector, which is up above the industry average, which is in blue. And the other thing is that it's going to not deal with the educational inequity, country schooling in particular. It's all socio-economic disadvantage that is causing the students to not perform as well as those more advantaged. And that, along with general income and wealth inequality, is a problem that Australia has also grown in the last 40 years. That's costing us 56 billion or 3.3% of GDP. That's not being treated with in this budget. And those school kids aren't going to get the teachers they need, rooms are empty. literally, when they go to school. 3.3% of GDP is more than the GDP growth rate that's anticipated to come out of the budget. Thank you. And I'll now pass you on to the higher education sector specialist, Virginie Masson. I'll take my hat.
Thanks. Yes,
I
need that. Thank you. All right, so regarding the higher education, I'm sure you all remember the Morrison era and the beautiful job-ready graduate legislation that went through. We are still under that legislation, and the goal was to try to steer away students from what they like to things that we believe are more useful to the country. It didn't work that well, but what it did, however, is increase student debt quite dramatically. So at the beginning of the year, the higher education sector was looking with great hope to the universities Accord and all the reforms that it says should be happening. Yesterday, we were all expecting a big bang. What we got is a complete fizzer with a lot of little bite-sized reforms and a lot of words for the future of education. So in terms of what is actually set, hopefully in stone, is an increase in the fee-free uni-ready courses program, and there will be about $350 million for this. So if you don't know, fee-free uni program is to help students who do not meet the standards or the requirements to enter the university to get through these courses so that then they can access higher education. Then there is, of course, the HECS indexation changes. So this is fantastic for people who had debt, especially for this year, because your indexation went down from 7.1% to 3.2%. You're taking the lowest now between the CPI, which is your inflation, and the WPI, which is your wage growth. However, since 2000, only on 4 occasions did you have the WPI being actually lower than the CPI. There will be a national student ombudsman. That's 20 million expense over 2 years. And probably one of the most talked about reform is the cap on international students. Cap on international students that apparently will be decided after consultation with the stakeholders. But basically the idea is once the cap is there, if you want to increase your cap, you have to provide housing for students that are available to both international and domestic students. Now, part of the budget, well, I would say wishful or hope, thinking that we have is a strategic examination of Australia's research and development system. It is written in the budget paper. There is no amount of money associated with that, nor there is any clear detail of what this actually means. So where do we go from there? Well, in mid-2025, we are expecting to have the government setting up an Australian Tertiary Education Commission, which is a body that will be responsible for allocating funding to the universities, but also quality standards and maybe a more strategic approach among all the universities rather than having them doing their own thing separately. In terms of funding reforms, there's 2 of them, so they were presented separately. One that is called Managed Growth Funding System, which is about the Commonwealth-supported places and their allocation, and this idea that this should align with what the government believes will be the future jobs for Australia. And then there's a needs-based funding, which is for the disadvantaged student. Again, there is no real commitment, nor there is real details about those reforms. We just have to wait and see what will happen. They're supposed to happen in January 2026. Now, of course, with a cap on international students, the question on everyone's mind is how this will affect the international market. It has already been through the mill, especially with COVID. We recovered, and now we're having another curveball thrown at us. So, again, time will tell. And thank you very much for coming. I'll pass on to our head of school, Professor Fiona Yap. Thank you.